of action essay. Of course, it will make us very strong. You'll have a difference in the way South Africa's foreign policy is run in the next 5 years at least. But with me today, it's not about me today. It's about a discussion about South Africa with a South African who left the country many years ago, but who continues to look back, like many of us continue to look back when we leave South Africa. And there are many, many others out there in the diaspora. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want to welcome Professor Edward Mienie. He's based all the way at the University of North Carolina in the USA. Prof, welcome.
Thank you very much, Solly. I'm honored to be invited to participate today. And may I just say at the outset, I'm participating as an independent. My comments are intended to be from an academic perspective. And so I just wanted to share that with you and with your audience.
Yeah, that's very important. Otherwise, it would be like speaking to the converted. it wouldn't make a very rich conversation if we just
Yes.
like internal belly gazing, if it were, which is not what we're looking
Right.
for.
Right.
Look, I'm fascinated by you said. Maybe let's first talk about how when you left South Africa and what it means for you to be a South African, because once a South African, always a South African, right? And what it means for
Yes.
you, especially when you look at this country from where you are at. What do you see? What did you hope to see? In perhaps maybe before we go in there, let me just read a little introduction so that people know whom we're talking to. Just a little one. I'm going to read it very shortly. So he, Professor Mienie, is the Executive Director and Professor of Strategic and Security Studies in the Department of Political Science and International Affairs at the University of North Carolina. He has more than 25 years of experience working in international relations and business, media relations, and coalition building. He earned a bachelor's degree in law from the University of South Africa and received his doctorate in international conflict management while teaching and leading the academic exchange program with South Africa at Kenzo State University. He is fluent in English, Afrikaans, and German. Apparently a bit of Flemish as well. Yes.
A little bit.
A little bit of Flemish. So you worked for the Department of Foreign Affairs or International Relations. That's what you call it in cooperation now. You were posted in different parts of the world. You've worked in coalition building, in peace building missions. It's it's a very rich professional experience trajectory that you have built up to now, and you remain South African. You have watched this country. What do you see?
Yes. Thank you very much, Solly. I was very interested in how there's an organization here in Virginia called Systemic Peace. And they come out with a state fragility index every year, covering all the nations in the world. And at the time of my research, I noticed that they had classified South Africa as a relatively stable state. Being in a position where I visit South Africa annually, where I have family and friends still living, I know there's a different side to this. And so I questioned the factors that they take into consideration in order to categorize a country as being stable or failed or anything in between. And I question whether the existing factors that they take into consideration in order to measure state fragility actually does measure state fragility.
Right.
And so I came up with a different model from the one that they use. I used different factors. I decided to go the human security theoretical framework way, where human security really is about freedom from fear, freedom from want, and a life of dignity. And I focused on four main pillars of the human security theoretical framework. The first is personal security. The second one's community security, then political security and economic security. And so I did my field research where I gathered rich data by way of interviewing people from across the political spectrum, across the gender divide, across the color divide, and people that were in government, currently former cabinet members, people in the intelligence community, academics, NGOs, people in the private security industry, and we can go into my findings in a while.
Yeah. Right.
You know, based on the data that I gathered, juxtapose that against the relative stability that the State Fragility Index declares South Africa as. This in-betweenness is where I come up with this term that South Africa at the time was in fact latently fragile.
Yeah.
And of course, that's 4 years ago since I published my book, and the title being Security Governance and State Fragility in South Africa. I'm sad to say that the indicators have not gone in the right direction. In fact, the situation has become worse in South Africa when I look at these different areas that I just mentioned and the threats to these different areas, these different security areas that I'd mentioned. Yeah,
So did you, yeah,
yeah.
go ahead.
No, please go.
So did you find that the indicators, the original indicators, I mean, they probably worked in some parts of the world, in other countries, but because you know South Africa so well, you've observed South Africa, to you it was like we need to look at other indicators to properly classify, describe South Africa in 2024. If now we're in 2024, it was in 2020 when you wrote your book.
Yes, exactly. South Africa is very unique. We are a combination of, we went through a period of colonization hundreds of years ago. Then you're looking at the apartheid years. Then you're looking at the transition from autocracy to democracy. And then you're looking at 30 years in this new democratic South Africa. I say new, it feels new, although it's 30 years old already. So it's more than a generation old, in my
Right.
opinion. And it was birthed as the Rainbow Nation, and yet here we are 30 years later, from 1994 until today, where I don't believe this is the South Africa that President Mandela had in mind and that he had fought for and that he had spent 27 years in prison for.
Right.
This is not the South Africa that he had in mind at all. And in the words of Archbishop Desmond Tutu, if he were to, figuratively speaking, come back from the grave, he would, in Bishop Tutu's words, he would just go back to the grave, and he would be shocked at the way South Africa currently finds itself in.
So look, I think it's not just Mandela who had we should imagine what kind of South Africa he had in mind, or Tutu and others. We also, those of us who were there, when the promise was made about a better country that would not be the past, that would be it's all in the Constitution. One just needs to read, if one doesn't have time, just read the preamble to the South African Constitution. It's very clear about the kind of country we wanted to build. But look, maybe let's steer our discussion away from describing the problem. We know the issues are, and we're going to keep coming back to those indicators because it's important that we talk about them. But I think the key thing is we have elections coming up in about 13 days. There are more than 50 political parties and independent candidates for the first time who are registered to campaign, to compete for position to get into the next government. We don't have, at least at national level, experience with coalition governance. And all indicators are that we're going to end up with a coalition of sorts. Now, there are different kinds of coalitions that are staring us in the face. You have extreme left or right coalitions, depending on how you look at things, which a potential coalition which would be made up of the African National Congress, the governing party. I usually call it the misgoverning party because that's what it is. And it's what I describe as ideological subsidiaries, the EFF, MK, MTN, Good, all those parties that tend to align with African National Congress. I mean, it remains the makulubas of that potential coalition, which would be disastrous in my view for South Africa. And there's also a coalition that is further that's closer to the middle, if you want. And of course, I'm biased. I speak to you as a member of Action SA. But the truth is that if you look at South Africa as a diverse country, which it is, which will always be, it's hard and it doesn't make sense. It would never make sense to try to govern this country from an extreme. If you want to reach out to as many South Africans as possible and make as many South Africans as possible feel that this is their home, irrespective of what they look like, how they pray, gender identities, and all that stuff. You can't do it from any extreme. So what do you see, especially what do you think South Africans, us, all of us, should be doing to prepare ourselves for a very likelihood of a coalition governance, irrespective of which way on the line is that's going to sit?
Yes. Um, Let me respond this way. My understanding, and from what I can gather, is that coalition government at local and provincial level has not been very successful. And I hope that's not a forebearer of what's going to happen on the national level.
Mhm.
I really believe that whoever the coalition will consist of, certainly the ANC, plus who knows which other parties will be part of that coalition, that party politics would be set aside and the interests of South Africa and all South Africans will get top priority. What does this look like? Where should they focus their efforts? In my research, I actually come up with areas that need to be focused on. So
Mhm.
whether it's a one-party majority or whether it's a coalition, obviously a coalition is going to have more challenges. That's just the nature of a coalition government. It's not an ideal situation. And certainly, the first thing is, it's very disturbing to see companies like Shell and PNB exiting South Africa because of the uncertainty of South Africa's future based on this upcoming election results. We need to instill investor confidence in South Africa.
Mhm.
And in our effort to do that, we need to make South Africa safe and secure.
Mhm.
And we need to ensure that we're taking care of people's personal and community and political and economic security,
Mhm.
that there's a life of dignity for all. So these are areas that need to be embraced by the coalition. And how do we get there? I mean, we have an existing South African police service
Mhm.
with huge budget, with manpower, and yet the crime statistics keep on just going in the wrong direction.
Right.
So what do we do? Well, let's think about that. We have a massive private security industry. Is there not a way that government and private security industry can cooperate and collaborate with one another at national level?
Well, in
Maybe
your
that's
book,
something.
you
Yes.
mentioned the rise of private security companies as one of the indicators that the state is not able to provide those services anymore, which is very true. Even, I mean, I've
Yes.
seen South African police services stations be relying on private security companies to make sure their own security is secured. That's really painful. But
Yes, it's
again,
painful.
look, maybe, I mean, we know there's got to be less corruption, there's got to be more caring government, we have to take care of security issues, other provision, we have to create a climate for businesses, for investments to come in, to thrive, so that business can create jobs, etc. So we know that pretty much. But how do we do it? And don't you think there's a need to not just be a different team, the new government, whatever the new government is going to be? I mean, we're going to be leading in that coalition. There's going to be, don't you think there's a need for us South Africans to look back 30 years And look at all these fine institutions of democracy that were created, and everybody thought they would sit between us and hell. But over the past 30 years, they've proven to be vulnerable to abuse by men and women in politics who go in there smiling, charming, dancing, and suddenly when they see all this power, they turn into monsters. How do we ensure that no one ever gets to do that to us again? What would you say to any coalition that comes in there? Because it's got to be something that systemic changes that are made to make it impossible for state capture to happen again, whether it's solely Moeng or somebody else who comes in with a smile, because all these people came in there with a smile, well, more or less.
Right, right, right. Well, I say that we do not mess around with the Constitution as it stands, and
Mhm.
I know that there is a school of thought that if the coalition has a two-thirds or more majority, that becomes a real possibility for the
Mhm.
Constitution to change. Transparency, accountability needs to be instilled in the system somehow so that there's no abuse like there currently is
But
of the
how?
state apparatus.
Mhm.
Well, yeah, you know, Parliament for sure has an oversight responsibility, and those committees need to have teeth, subpoena powers, and referrals to the court system for violation, transgression of any of the laws.
Mhm.
Effective inspector generals of the
Mhm.
different government departments. This is essential as well.
Right.
And effective judiciary as well. So we cannot afford for the judiciary to be politicized.
Mhm.
They need to absolutely maintain their independence and
But
embrace that.
don't you
Yes.
think, look, I mean, I hear you that we think that the constitution should not be touched. A number of people, including a very respected former deputy chief justice, said we placed too much power in the presidency, thinking that everybody is going to be like Mandela. We've seen how those powers have been abused or in the past. We had Jacob Zuma, we had even Mbeki was the first person to try and shield a very, how to say, criminal captured police commissioner. He fired or suspended a national director of public prosecutions. The current president has placed the intelligence services into the presidency. Now, don't you think all that too much power would be tempting for anybody who comes in there and say, "Wow, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this." Surely living, therefore, we end up with a republic and a democracy whose health and well-being relies on the goodwill or the good health of a man or woman in power. That's dangerous.
Yes, I'm afraid, Solly, there's no quick fix to this. It's a matter of educating the electorate that there's more than just the ANC out there. And I think it's going to take time for that generation to, start fading away, and the new generations that follow
Mm,
come to realize that not much has been delivered. Yes,
mm,
have there been positive changes? Absolutely.
mm.
But I just recently had a young South African, a black lady from Stellenbosch University, come on an exchange for a semester here, and
Mm,
so she's South African. I'm former South African, standing in front of the classroom, and
mm.
they're getting two different points of view, and she was very outspoken against the ANC
Right.
for not delivering. Her parents are staunch ANC supporters, have been and will probably die being staunch ANC supporters, but not
Mm,
her generation. And I'm talking about the generation between 20 and 30. Not
right.
much has changed. Our
Mm,
unemployment percentage of people that are unemployed has gone through the roof.
yeah.
It's very alarming to note that in the age group 16 to 25, there's more
Mm.
than a 70% unemployment rate.
So,
So educating the electorate is a big part of how do we change this.
right.
It's the power of the vote. Who are we going to be voting into power?
Mm.
And I think if the electorate is educated as to what the alternatives are to the ANC, that's a big step forward. But how do we do that?
Well,
Right?
we have 13 days to get there. Well, you seem to be saying to me, Sally, the structures are fine. Let's just make sure that people, the men and women who are going into those positions, will be more mindful of what's good for South Africans and for the country. They will behave. But I mean, look, we've tried this so many times. Now, I want to go back to the discussion about your indicators in your book of
Yes.
speciality, and maybe let's talk. If you can just speak to each one of those, what would you say to the incoming government in this in relation? I'll just mention them, just a few of them. You mentioned rising violent crime. You mentioned high unemployment. You mentioned endemic poverty, eroding public trust, identity group based preferential treatment, maybe BEE, affirmative action policies. I think you're trying to say it too nicely here. I don't know why. Rapid rise of private security sector, and all of this stuff. You mentioned that as indicators that South Africa is 4 years ago. You described it as a latent, fragile state. And of course, we are grey listed. As you know, we've been downgraded a few times. The economy and several state-owned institutions have been downgraded a few times. Stagnant economic growth, collapsed infrastructure, ports, the rail services, electricity, roads, parks. It's terrible. So suppose you get invited to speak to the new government, the coalition sitting in front of you. What do you say to them?
Yes. I refer to these as policy recommendations. Does that sound good to you? Can I go through a few of them?
Yes, please.
Yes. Okay. So, as I mentioned earlier, an enhanced collaboration between the government and the private security industry.
Mm,
There's it's an absolute. People need to feel safe in South Africa. Only in a safe environment can
mhm,
one expect to get investment, both locally and internationally. And so I think that's a top order of business, is stabilizing the country that way. Get the crime rates down. And we talk about homicide rates, but
mhm,
listen, the grievous bodily assaults, which
mhm,
includes rape, we need to add that to the homicide rate. More people die in South Africa per day than in the Ukraine war. I mean, that's an
mhm.
unbelievable statistic.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. And that needs to change. So, I have a number of recommendations under that
Mhm,
sort of heading of enhanced collaboration between the private security industry and the South African government. I talk
right.
about establishing a top leadership police academy in South Africa, not for the
Mhm,
rank and file, but for the leadership,
mhm.
because that's where it starts. That's where they set the tone at
What,
that
what,
level.
what do you mean by not for the rank and file, but for the leadership?
They have, so we do have an academy,
Mhm,
a police college of sorts where the rank and file get trained, and they go
right,
through courses, and they commission out of that. But for the top leadership, I think a separate
right.
entity. Yeah. So
So it's
where
like
the
a high
focus.
school and a university kind of stuff.
Sure, sure.
Right. Okay.
For yeah. Another
Mhm,
one is the crime statistics reporting. There's an incentive for downplaying the crime statistics.
mhm.
A monetary incentive for certain police districts, showing that they are getting crime under control. I say that that's got to change. We need an apolitical NGO together
Mhm.
with the government at a higher level, reporting more accurately on the crime statistics, because
Mhm.
this becomes a political football.
Well, there
Um,
are also many allegations of certain police officers being involved with organized crime practitioners, if you call them that way, who benefit from drug peddlers, human trafficking, and that sort of thing. How do you root
right.
that out? I mean, how do you safeguard the police services or criminal justice system from political interference, because this is the problem we've had, especially during state
Yes.
capture. Politicians thinking they can just go in there and give instructions to
Yeah.
prosecutors, to police, etc.
Yes, I know. Yes. Again, we need, an independent inspectorate that has teeth, that can prosecute,
Mhm.
that will not stand for any corruption, any political interference, because the police service is there to render a service to all South Africans, irrespective of their political orientation.
Right.
And they're not fulfilling this role, and it may be for a number of reasons, whatever they may be, but that
Mhm.
needs to be addressed. So, a strong independent inspectorate, where there's no fear of any political repercussions,
Right.
um, and where truth can be spoken to power. So we need strong leadership within that organization.
Mhm. You mean within the SAPS, a reformed SAPS,
Yes,
right?
yes, yes,
And what
yes.
about the
Uh,
NPA? I mean, there are lots of complaints in South Africa that the National Prosecution Authority goes after the small guys, not the big guys. I mean, if you commit an ordinary crime, they're very good. I mean, both the SAPS, the Hawks, and the NPA will go after you. But there are indications that the big guys are still not remain untouched. And many of them were named in the recent Zondo Commission report, which and again, I need to put it to you. You tell me. So, if the drafters of our constitution, which you recommend strongly should be left as it is, did not foresee a time in the future, which is recent years, when a commission such as Ozondo would be established for the reasons that we all know, the report and recommendations of which would be handed over to the president of the party that is in the middle of the mess. That's why nothing is happening. So surely something needs to be changed so that in circumstances like this, reports of this nature are given to an independent body that is a really independent that will act on them and not the leader of the gang, as it were. Because I mean, the ANC's leader president is the leader of the gang that's involved, that's highly implicated in this capture. So we are basically sitting there as South Africans hoping that one day they'll act against their own, but they're not really acting against their own because you know what I'm saying? So surely something has to change in the constitution because somebody else, if they could do this to us, somebody else is likely to do it to us again in the future.
yes, Solly. You know, I believe in a vibrant democracy, and how do you protect that? You need separation of powers,
Right.
and right. You have the executive, legislative, and the administrative powers. We need a very strong division between those powers so that they can keep each other accountable. But now
Yeah.
we're moving into the realm of constitutional law, and so that's a little bit out of my
Okay.
wheelhouse there.
That's okay.
Yeah,
I'm not
yeah,
a specialist in constitutional law, but as a citizen, as somebody who reads, who observes what's going on, it's clear that there are too many powers in the presidency, for instance. It's clear that a lot of powers, politicians have, for instance, the current system, MPs do not report to constituents, they report to political party leaders.
yeah,
Okay, and it's proven not to work. Earlier, there
yes,
was a discussion in South Africa about public participation processes, which are never taken seriously by the current government. So you say
yes,
citizens participate in issues. So the government wants to do X, it puts a bill out there. Many people would oppose the bill, including the current, the health bill, the national health insurance that has been signed into law yesterday by the president. More than 135,000 people gave their views on this bill, many of which opposed it. But this was not taken seriously. So this is surely the democracy we thought was strong. It would hold this country and these beautiful, diverse people into the future has proven to be vulnerable. We cannot do anything about it. Surely you can't say to a new political guys coming in, hopefully led by Action, and saying, guys, come on, you can't afford to leave these fault lines untouched into the future.
Right. I may be the bearer of bad news or not such good news, but in the words of Huntington, the true test of a democracy is if the ruling party has lost at least twice and accepted the outcome of that general election that they've just gone through. Uh,
Mhm.
if they've accepted that they play their role, then maybe as the opposition or a lesser party, and they don't contest,
Mhm.
then we can talk about a vibrant democracy.
Right. We're
So
not.
we
We're
we
not.
are not there yet. So and from people and sources that I've been talking to, the feeling is that the ANC would have between 40 and not 50%, but 40 and a high 40%
They're not
voter
telling the
support.
truth. I don't know where they come from. It's got to be below 40. I can tell you that for sure.
Okay. Okay. Well,
Why do you meet these people?
yeah, I'm just relaying, so in other words, not an outright loss, but certainly together with a coalition partner or partners, there would be a majority coalition government with the ANC as the main party there. Maybe not, right?
Most probably not.
Most
Okay.
probably not.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So
So
I mean, look, the ANC has. I'm sorry too. The ANC has been
no,
in power for 30 years, and look at the state of South Africa. We should all hope. Of course, I'm biased, but I'm biased for South Africa. I'm biased because I'm working with a team of amazing people who are really determined, who don't want to leave. I had to leave but that's a different story. We want to stay here and save this country. All right. So if the ANC stays in power, and I really believe it will not be as strong as you seem to think it might be, nothing is going to change because these people
yes.
have been in power. They are used to having things. Why should they change? And I fear that if they get a strong support electorally, they're going to feel that they're being endorsed. People are saying, "Yeah, keep going. We're happy with you." But look at the state of South Africa.
Right. No, I agree. Change has to come. We cannot continue on the trajectory that we are currently on, South Africa is currently on. And I think this is the beginning maybe of the end. Certainly, if not this election, in a few days' time, and 29, ANC would have an absolute diminished voter support. Certainly diminished this time around because that's been the trend since 1994. Of bigger concern to me, Solly, is the stay away vote. I'm
Right.
worried about that. This is people that have disengaged from the system
Hmm.
because of being disillusioned. And so where do they find a home, political home?
Hmm.
And if they remain unengaged, that doesn't bode well for South Africa. Because whatever kind of coalition government comes into power, we then got to question the legitimacy of that
Yeah.
coalition government. Um, do the people respect the governors? So the
Mhm.
governed need to respect that in order for the governors to maintain and retain their legitimacy.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we've been dealing. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, indications are that there's a lot more people who registered to vote this time than in previous elections. So we should just hope
Okay,
that all of those people who are registered to vote will stand up and go and vote for South Africa because it's important that as many of them vote. Because it's one thing to register to vote; it's different to say, "Well, am I going to vote or not?" And I think I
right.
hope people will realize that their voice is important for this country. You can't complain and sit at home and do nothing.
Correct. Yes,
And we
I
hope that
agree.
will change. I really let's finish the discussion on your indicators, but I also want us to talk about South Africa in the global arena. You have experience in foreign policy, in the foreign, and you sitting where you are, you must be watching South Africa, how it plays, how it's positioned in the global arena. Some of the key issues, whether it's Ukraine or Israel, Palestine, or the United Nations Security Council, what were we taken as? How were we taken when Mandela, in the early years of our democracy, and how are we taken today by the global community? Can we still play a very decisive role as hopefully a leader of the southern of what you call the global South and Africa. I mean, it's been, what do you see there? But maybe
Yes.
let's navigate towards this conversation by finishing the indicators, especially that touch on this topic.
Yes. If I can just finish some of the
Yep.
policy, the relations between the government and the community, the public trust needs to be reestablished in government, to whatever the government's going to look like. So that's huge, and that's quite a mouthful. And how do you accomplish that? The social divide between the haves and the have-nots. That's a government function. That's not a security system function. And again, we can go into a lot of detail there, but in the interests of time, I just want to mention the
Sure.
highlights of some of the policy recommendations. And then the management of the criminal justice system. The system is overburdened with all the crime and the prosecutions. What about alternative dispute resolution mechanisms, right? What about mobile courts like we had in 2010 during the Soccer World Cup that South Africa hosted? These are things that can come back again and could alleviate those pressure points. You touched on this. I use this fancy word, preferential. Yeah,
BE affirmative action, race-based policies. Let's call them what they are.
That's right. So the BEE and affirmative action had a place in South Africa, and we all understood that. But 30 years later, it needs to go. It needs to go. And it needs to go so that everyone can benefit from that. I know it sounds contradictory in what I'm saying, but that is going to be the outcome, in my opinion, getting rid of those two government policies. So those are just a few touch points on policy recommendations. The four factors or the four legs of the human security framework that I use: economic security, the levels of poverty, the unemployment. All citizens must have equal access to economic opportunities.
Right.
And that's another reason why those two, BEE and AA, needs to go, affirmative action. Where it comes to South Africa in the international community, South Africa prides itself on being non-aligned. And then, nevertheless, noises are made, pro-Russia in the Ukraine war. South Africa got involved in the Gaza incident, and we all know about the action brought by South Africa at the ICJ. I'd like to say that economics and politics are two sides of the same coin. So are we embracing a non-aligned, neutral stance, or are we actually taking sides? South Africa, that is.
Right.
I don't know, and that needs to be considered. Are we estranging our investment partners, our trade partners, as a result of the political decisions South Africa is making? Well, perhaps we are. Perhaps we are. I know South Africa is part of the BRICS, and this has lately been expanded to include other countries as well. We need to decide what our value system is, our way of life in South Africa. Who's going to dictate that? Are we beholden to the East or to the West, or a combination of the two?
Well,
We need to think.
Mandela used to
Yes.
say, and we're saying, definitely as Action is saying, that South Africa's foreign policy would be underpinned by consideration for human rights. We would stand up as a beacon of hope for marginalized, for threatened communities, whoever they are, wherever they are. But over the past number of years, over the past 10, 15, maybe 20 years, we have failed many communities in Africa. In Sudan, we tried to defend al-Bashir, who was wanted by the ICC here. We ensured that he does. I mean, say it's a royal we, the African National Congress led government, ensure that this man doesn't get arrested. Robert Mugabe, when he went, crazy in his own country, many Zimbabweans ended up in South Africa fleeing the actions and the policies of Robert Mugabe and ZANU-PF. South Africa never stood up. Actually, indications are that South Africa, under the ANC, shielded and collaborated with Mugabe and ZANU-PF because this thing called a community of former liberation parties. So they would stand by each other no matter what. South Africa was seen by many people as a potential leader in Africa, as a country led by black people that would show the world that we can handle a really complex economy, modern democracy. But we have failed. I mean, one other
Yes.
example, a number of years ago, there was a vote, a United Nations resolution on the protection of LGBTIQ plus communities. South Africa chose to abstain from that vote. And when journalists asked the minister at the time of Foreign Affairs or International Relations, she said, "Well, South Africa can be seen to be moving too far ahead of its African peers." Now, that's not leadership, really. We have a number of countries in recent years who've adopted laws to criminalize being gay, lesbian, and other gender identities. South Africa is not speaking out against those things. So surely what human rights in the current regime are we defending?
Right. Exactly. I mean, I've heard nothing from the ANC government as it relates to the Uyghurs in China, how they are being abused and misused in labor camps. That's a human rights violation,
Yeah,
and we're talking about 1 million+ people, and not a word coming out of that. Of course, that country capitalizes on corrupt leadership, corrupt governments, and for their own personal,
yeah,
for their
right.
own national interests. Of course, they go about
Mm. Well,
bribing.
while it makes sense for South Africa to continue being part of the BRICS for economic reasons, we're not going to look for human rights leadership in there. I'm not in Saudi Arabia, not in Iran, not in China, not in Russia. So we're going to have to find a way to stand up with a South African voice, isn't it? That says, this is what we stand for. This is what we cannot align with. Maybe, do you think South
Yes,
Africa should consider being the Switzerland of Africa, of the southern? I'm saying this because Switzerland in the global, in the United Nations system is the only country that's considered to be a neutral country. We have the
right.
offices of Switzerland. It stands to hold two warring parties together and say, guys, please have a conversation. We know that, for instance, America would be represented in Iran or in Tehran in the Swiss embassy, and vice versa. Swiss Tehran would be represented in the US, perhaps in the Swiss embassy. That sort of thing. They have a desk to say, guys, we're the neutral guys. Our aim is to get you to talk.
Right. That's a very interesting thought you have there, Solly. I like that idea very much, actually. South Africa is still a leading nation on the African continent, and
Yeah.
I hope we can stabilize and increase that position. But I like the idea of being a neutral country.
Yeah, I'm sorry about the noise. I have a cat that's playing with something here. I hope it doesn't
No
bother.
problem. No
Okay.
problem at all.
Yeah, I mean, so there's a potential for South Africa to not try and go into the world and throw tantrums all over the place and be the leader
Right,
that can still be. You need a leadership
right.
that can craft that kind of positioning for the country.
Right. Of course, we're living in a more unstable world.
Mm,
During the Cold War, it was a bipolar world.
mm,
Post-Cold War, we're looking at multipolar world, and
yeah,
and we have these flashpoints. We mentioned two of them: the Gaza-Israeli
mm,
situation, the Ukraine, and then potentially Taiwan.
yeah, yeah,
Um, and of course, the United States going through there's a run up to a general election in November as well.
mm,
Very interesting developments here. So, strong leadership's required on the side of the United States and certainly on the side of South Africa. But
mm,
I place a question mark over the moral bearings of the current leadership in South Africa, the ANC leadership. It's become very um, sort of self-focused, inward-focused. On a
Right.
personal level, it's about
Right.
self-enrichment and at the expense of South Africa. So it's as though the leadership, the government has lost its moral bearing
Mm.
from where it ought to have been, as envisioned in '94 by Nelson Mandela. You know.
Do you think South Africa should play a bigger role in the global call for the reform of the United Nations Security Council? Given that this body was created soon after the past war, the Second World War, it was fitted to the times. But today, there are five big countries that hold the veto power that can just it takes one country to say to a whole general assembly representing the whole world to say, no, you can't do that. Surely there's something wrong with that.
Yes, yes. You know, again, you're correct. The UN Security Council was birthed immediately after the Second World War, and that was for a specific time and place. And now we are living in a completely different world. Um, it warrants change. What the change looks like, I'm not sure. Your question is, should South Africa play a role in pushing for a change? I don't see why not. The
Right.
question is, are the five going to give that up? And will they be open? Will they be
Not
open to
easily.
it?
No,
Not
nobody gives
easily.
power easily, but I think the call is legitimate. I mean, you said it yourself. I said it that those institutions were created for a different time, for different dynamics. The world has changed. It's not only in bipolar, as you say, it's multipolar. It's polarizing.
Yes.
It's fragmenting. It's archipelizing, as they say in French. They say it's
Yes.
archipelizing.
Okay.
And South Africa has to be smart and not use emotion in playing this game because it cannot be taken seriously when it goes into a room and it shouts and wriggles on the ground if it doesn't get what it wants, right? And we have to
Right.
speak to the people that we don't agree with, but because in the end we have to convince, isn't it?
Right. Correct. Yes. Yes. I agree.
What do you think, over the past 20 years, I want to move closer to home and the region. Over the past maybe 15, 20 years, the ANC government has been rather lax on border control. What do
Mm.
you say? And in South Africa, we've seen an influx of lots of people from other African countries, from Pakistan, from England, maybe from India, from many, many other places far away, who came here. And it's a combination of probably border officials looking the other way or accepting bribes. There have been many cases of officials at Home Affairs accepting bribes to give people South African identity documents. There was a time when, with a South African passport, you could go into places like Germany, the UK, maybe Switzerland, without needing a visa. And then they started seeing people from Pakistan coming into the UK with South African names in some cases and South African passports. They said, "Oh, we're not letting." So, what do you say to an incoming coalition government? There are also human rights issues that get thrown at any government that says, "Well, I mean, we have to get everybody at least documented. No country just allows. We don't know. We don't know who's in this country. There could be people who are murderers who are also you organize work about organized crime and people who are sitting here who are doing crazy things out there. Surely the incoming government must find a way, maybe human way. Of course, it has to be humane to deal with this thing. What do you say?
Yes. Yeah, yeah. So it's concerning to me. This is indicative of a good governance deficit. The fact that we have open borders in South Africa. Uh, I question whether or not the national government has full control over all of South Africa's sovereign territory. Does it indeed? That may be a negative reflection on the defense force and on the other security forces, the police, the intelligence, the
Mm.
national intelligence. Solly, that there are training camps for non-state actors in South Africa, unsavory non-state actors.
That's
This does
scary.
not bode well.
That's
It
very
does not
scary.
bode well. Exactly.
Yeah.
With the recent visit by the Minister of Foreign Affairs to Iran, and then
Mm.
I'm not saying there's a connection, but it's interesting to note that the ANC coffers became flush with cash after this visit. I don't know if there's a connection to this at all. But again, there you're looking at state capture of South Africa's foreign policy to an extent, right?
That's very well.
Um,
Surely, the big powers, they have intelligence services that might be seeing these things. Maybe they are talking to South Africans, hey, we can see you. Or they're sitting in bed to say, okay, well, let's be ready. Let's sit back and see where this thing goes. I mean, it cannot be that other people, wherever they are not watching what's happening here.
right, exactly. It is, we look at the African Growth and Opportunity Act, which Congress had, which the administration had signed into law, and this is for sub-Saharan African countries to get
Right.
favorable trading status with the United States, and
In
there
AGOA,
was
in
a
AGOA.
exactly, and recently there have been noises in Congress that they should reevaluate South Africa's
Mm.
situation because of recent activities as it relates to the Ukraine war and as it relates to the Gaza
Yeah.
massacre. Um, and here's the question: can we afford uh,
Mm.
to lose one of our most important trading partners? This is why I mentioned earlier, economics and politics are two sides of the same
Yeah, of course.
coin.
We can't grow the economy and create more opportunities for people to earn income in lawful ways if we don't
Yes,
maintain the relationships that we have with our partners. It
yes,
doesn't mean that we cannot have discussions about hot issues with those partners where we should, and if we want to be a leader, we should be able to, but it doesn't mean that
yes.
we burn the bridges and walk away from stuff, really, does
Ex
it?
ex exactly right. I find that very myopic in the case of the government, the current government,
We
to
have
be dismissive. Yep,
We have
go
about
ahead.
4 minutes to go. I want, if you can, now we have elections coming. Of course, there's a core discussion here. But South Africa has become such a, almost like a fully perforated bucket. It's one thing when you're dealing with one or two or three holes, trying to find ways to plug them. But we're talking here with a bucket with so many holes. When does a coalition government start fixing this country? What is your
Um,
shot?
yeah, I Solly, we need massive foreign direct investments.
Mm,
In order to get that, we need a secure South Africa.
right.
So we need an effective security system, not sector, but system. And I use the word system. A sector is very narrow, whereas
Mm,
system would include, the courts, would include NGOs, includes the press,
right.
government ministries of all ministries,
Mhm.
and of course, intelligence, police, and defense. So we need a strong security system with strong security system actors.
Mm.
And I say that's where we start because with investment in South Africa, economic opportunities are birthed, and we can start addressing the big divide between the haves and the have-nots in South
Right,
Africa.
right.
An apprentice system like they have in Germany. Why
Hmm.
don't we embrace this? I think
Hmm.
that's wonderful. It helps. It serves. It helps during the apprenticeship. It helps
Yeah.
the companies involved,
Hmm.
and it helps the individual. Once they qualify, they go out. They can start their own business.
Yeah, but we
Um,
have to create an environment for people with lots of money, whether they're already in South Africa or they're outside South Africa, to see the confidence, to see light ahead of the on the other side of the tunnel, to see hope that they can make long-term investment commitments to this country. So you need policies
exactly.
that create that kind of environment over time.
Exactly. And, I know you served some time you lived some time in Switzerland. These are
Mm.
very careful bankers. They will
Yeah.
not put their money in a bank that's shaky. So they want that bank to get stability
Mm.
before they would. And it's very interesting. Switzerland would never withdraw their existing foreign direct investment in South Africa, but they won't increase it, and they've got the capacity to increase it.
Right, right.
So let's create the environment for them to increase that foreign direct investment in the case of Switzerland. Why not?
Yeah.
Why not?
Well, Professor Mienie, it's 1 hour goes by really quickly, but it's
Yes.
been very interesting to speak to you, and I'm very happy that you spoke as an independent person that you are, because we need to hear these voices. I would have wanted maybe just one quick word. What do you say to South Africans? There are lots of South Africans who left this country over the past 10, 15 years for all the reasons that you mentioned, security, maybe the BEE, affirmative action laws, made it difficult for their children and themselves to make business, to get jobs here. They're sitting in the diaspora, and all these people love South Africa. What do you say to them? Say you become the incoming president, or you want to say to the incoming president, you need to speak to these people. They still love South Africa wherever they are. They might not be here. They love it. What do you say to them?
Yes, I'm a person of hope. There's hope for South Africa. South Africans are good people, and the majority want the country to work. They want it to be the country that it ought to be. I believe that with my whole heart.
Mm,
And attracting those that have left, of course, the outreach and the invitation to come and participate in a revitalized South Africa is always a good way to go.
mm,
Whether these people will come is another one, is another question. Uh,
mm,
but I do believe that there's hope. We need to give our youth hope, and it
mm,
depends on people like yourself and others that are reasonable thinkers, that are moderates,
mm,
that embrace the everything that South Africa has to offer, and that wants to improve the lot for all South Africans. Um, it depends on us to set the tone
mm.
and to make a difference. But
Yeah,
I remain hopeful. I believe that things can be turned around. It's late in the day, but it's the power of the vote, and the voters can make a difference in this election. They can. They
yeah.
don't realize that that one vote accumulatively over millions of votes can bring around about change.
Yeah, people who have left, like yourselves, don't have to come here. Some will be able to, some won't, but they can create goodwill for South Africa. They can, if they have a government at home, they can support, they feel comfortable with, because many of them still have their fathers, their mothers, sisters, friends, and all
Sure.
that. Yeah, they can act as goodwill ambassadors for this country wherever they are in the world. But we have to give them reason to believe that there is now a rebuild and we embrace them, whether they come back to live at home or not, surely.
Yes, exactly. And if we can use a sports analogy, let's embrace the Springbok model.
Yes,
Become
exactly.
world, become world champions. Yeah.
Professor Mini, thank you very much for your time. Really, really appreciate it. I'm sure we'll maybe let's do it again after the elections and look back and say, okay, now this is where we are, where to from here. Cover this.
That that'll be wonderful, Solly. I look forward to that. And may the best happen on May the 29th for the
Mhm.
country, not for the parties, but for the country.
So
And that's
what
that's
can I
my
say?
wish.
What can I say too? Because you
Of
can't get the
course.
changes if you don't get us in there.
Yes. Well, I wish Action SA all the best as well, Solly. And thank you so much for inviting me today. I'm honored to be with you, and I wish you well and all the best to you and all your friends within Action SA.
Thank you very much. I feel honored as well. I'm sure my colleagues feel the same way. Goodbye.
Okay. Goodbye.
Okay.
All the best.
Yeah. Bye
Bye-bye.
bye. Are we done? Yeah, we're done. Okay, I'm gonna look off. Goodbye, everybody.